I was pregnant. It should have been the most beautiful moment of my life, after nearly 2 years of struggling, with hope, tears, and endless doctor's appointments. Those 2 pink lines finally appeared on the test. I remember shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the sink and sit on the bathroom floor in silence. I just cried. Not out of fear, but out of overwhelming joy. I thought, maybe this time, everything will be different. Thomas and I had been married for 3 years. We were both in our early 30s, living in a quiet suburb of Wisconsin. Thomas was calm, reserved, a little distant, but I always believed he loved me in his own way. I used to think that having a child would soften him, that he would become the husband, the father I always hoped for. I had planned to make baked chicken pasta, his favorite, and place the pregnancy test next to his napkin, along with a handwritten note. We're going to need one more chair at the table. But I never got the chance to do any of it. Because when I walked into my own home that afternoon, I didn't just lose the man I loved. I lost myself. The house was eerily quiet until I stepped into the living room. And then I saw them, his entire family sitting there like a jury waiting to deliver a sentence. Thomas stood in the middle, his face stiff, holding a sheet of paper. I hadn't even processed what was going on when Nancy, my mother-in-law, said coldly, "Well, look who finally came home, our perfect little princess." I froze. Then Thomas threw the paper onto the table. I caught a glimpse of the header, DNA test results. "Do you have anything to say?" Thomas asked. His voice was void of emotion. What is this?" I stammered. I had never taken any kind of DNA test. "Stop pretending, Olivia. That baby you're carrying is Ethan's," Thomas's younger brother said, lounging on the sofa with one leg crossed, his smirk full of smug cruelty. My heart shattered into pieces. "Are you insane?" I stared at Ethan, my eyes wide with disbelief. I would never. I turned to Thomas, hoping for a single look of trust, just a flicker. But no. He looked at me like I was a stranger. And then it happened. Thomas, the man who once promised to protect me, who held my hand through infertility appointments, leaned forward and did the unthinkable. The warm splash of spit on my cheek reeked of betrayal. I didn't even have time to react. "You're disgusting," he said. Every word sliced through me. I stood frozen. The entire room spun. Then came the slap, a sharp crack across my cheek from Nancy. I staggered. Audrey and Sophia lunged toward me, grabbing my hair like ghosts crawling out of a nightmare. "We'll make sure everyone sees who you really are," Audrey shrieked, dragging me toward the front door. I struggled, screaming Thomas's name. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Neighbors peeked out, a few held up their phones. I couldn't hear anything but the blood pounding in my ears. In just minutes, I went from being a soon-to-be mother to a woman condemned and disgraced by an entire family. I didn't resist anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I only remember walking away, shoes still muddy from the front steps, stomach tightening like a warning. I vanished. Left without a word. Left no one the chance to find me. And in that moment, I didn't just walk away from that house. I walked away from the woman I used to be. We got married when I was 31 and Thomas was 35. The ceremony was simple, held at a small church in Milwaukee where I'd grown up. I didn't have many family members present. My parents died in a car accident during my last year of college, and the rest of my relatives were scattered across the country, mostly just exchanging holiday cards once a year. In contrast, Thomas's family showed up in full force, loud, traditional, and strangely inseparable. I used to think that closeness was beautiful. I was wrong. From the beginning, Nancy looked at me with skepticism. She was the kind of woman who believed no one would ever be good enough for her son. Every compliment she gave me carried a hidden sting. "Your cooking's not bad, Olivia, though Thomas still prefers my lasagna. That dress is interesting. When I was your age, I dressed a little more modestly. I tried to be patient. I thought time would soften her. But time only sharpened her edges." Thomas's sisters, Audrey and Sophia, never even pretended to like me. They were the type of women who didn't need to speak plainly to make you feel unwelcome. A single glance, a lopsided smirk was enough. Every family gathering felt like a test of endurance. And then there was Ethan. Ethan, the youngest brother, 27, unemployed, dropped out of college claiming he was finding his path. His path apparently was gaming, sleeping, and mooching off their parents. The first time I met Ethan was at our engagement party. He shook my hand, stared at me too long, and said, "My brother sure got lucky." I smiled politely, but the chill in my spine never left. Ethan had a way of looking at me that was never appropriate. Too long, too close. Whenever Thomas wasn't looking, I'd feel Ethan's gaze like it was trying to pin me to the wall. Not as a person, but as something he wanted to own. One time, I was washing glasses in my mother-in-law's kitchen after Thanksgiving dinner when Ethan walked in and shut the door behind him. It was just the two of us. "The lighting in here makes you look different," he said, leaning against the counter with his hands in his pockets, his eyes locked on my bare shoulder. A chill ran down my spine. I snapped, "Get out." "You afraid of me?" he drawled. I set the glass down and said calmly, "I'm not afraid. I'm uncomfortable." He shrugged and walked out, but not before saying, "I'm just joking, but not everyone in this family thinks you deserve my brother." I told Thomas. He went quiet, then said, "Ethan was just messing around. He's a little inappropriate, but he doesn't mean anything by it." I stared at him, stunned and disappointed. "So, if I say I feel threatened, you think I'm imagining it?" Thomas sighed and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. "It's just, they're my family, Olivia. Nobody's perfect, but they're my blood." That answer was the beginning of everything that followed. I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage. Thomas grew more distant. He stopped asking about my job, never wanted to plan trips, and completely lost interest in our fertility treatments. I went to the appointments alone, did the tests alone, took the medication alone. Thomas always had excuses, meetings, deadlines, or sudden calls from his mother. Anytime I brought up having children, he just mumbled and changed the subject. That's when I realized I hadn't married a man. I'd married an entire family. And in that family, I had never truly been accepted. I was just the outsider. And when Ethan decided to drag me into the depths with a vicious lie, not a single one of them stood by me. No one asked questions. No one needed proof. I had placed the pregnancy test in a small box, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a thin ivory ribbon. Inside was a handwritten note. "We're going to be parents." I had imagined Thomas opening it at the end of dinner, smiling, pulling me into his arms. I even stopped by the bakery to pick up his favorite apple pie, then hurried home before sunset. But the moment I stepped into the driveway, I saw my mother-in-law's car, both of Thomas's sisters, and Ethan. Their cars filled the front curb. My heart pounded, not from nerves, but from a dread I'd never felt so clearly. The door wasn't locked. I walked in, still holding the box. The house was cold, like someone had vacuumed all the warmth out of the air. Thomas stood in the middle of the living room, his eyes void of any trace of the man I had loved. He looked at me like I was a complete stranger. "Sit down," Nancy said, her voice as cold as a courtroom verdict. I didn't sit down. I held the box tighter. "What's going on?" Thomas held up a sheet of paper. I glanced at the printed words. "DNA paternity test, positive match, Ethan Gallagher." I went numb. "What? What is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Ethan lounged casually in the chair, one leg over the other, smirking like he was watching a bad play unfold. "Thomas found it in your purse," Audrey chimed in, arms crossed. "Quite the discovery, Olivia." "That's not mine." I shook my head, my chest tightening. "I didn't take any tests. I only found out I was pregnant today." Ethan stood slowly. "Then what about the pregnancy test in your bag? Funny timing, huh?" Thomas said nothing. His face was carved in stone. I reached out, trying to touch his arm. "You know me. I didn't do anything wrong. It's him, Ethan. He's lying." And then the unthinkable happened. He hurled every ounce of contempt in one brutal act, a spit that shattered whatever was left between us. The shock locked me in place. That salt on my lips wasn't just saliva, it was every ounce of trust, love, and marriage I'd fought for, shattered. "You're disgusting," he said, each word hitting like a hammer to my chest. Then came the slap, swift and merciless from Nancy. My head snapped to the side with a sound that echoed like judgment. "I always suspected," she hissed, hand trembling. "Just waited for the truth to show." Audrey and Sophia didn't need another word. They lunged, grabbing my hair like I was a criminal being dragged to justice. They hauled me toward the door before I could react. The door flung open. It was dusk now, and the streetlight above the porch lit my shame like a spotlight. I heard a door creak open across the street. Someone saw. Someone was watching as I was pulled from the house I used to call home. "Let the neighbors see what kind of woman you really are," Audrey shouted. "No one feels sorry for a cheater like you." I screamed, "Tomas, you can't believe this. Ethan is lying. Look at me. Do you really think I could do that?" But Tomas just stood there. His eyes were blank. Not angry, not sad, just empty. Like I had never meant anything at all. When they let go of me, I had no strength left. I stumbled away from the house, my hand still gripping the crushed box. Inside, the test was shattered. The physical pain was nothing compared to the blow to my trust. They didn't need verification. They didn't need an explanation. They just needed an excuse to throw me away, and Ethan had handed them a perfect one. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. Just walked, carrying a tiny life inside me, and a heart crushed by betrayal from the very person who once swore to protect me. 2 years passed. I lived a new life. Quiet, peaceful, far from the memories. I was no longer the woman who stood under a porch light, bruised and discarded, with an unborn child she never got to introduce. I worked remotely for a marketing company in Oregon, living with my son in a small apartment with sunlit windows. That child, I named him Ely, was all the goodness I had left. And every time his little fingers wrapped around mine, I remembered. Leaving was the right choice. I cut off all contact. No email, no social media, no old phone number. The people who knew me best, none of them had any reason to look for me. They had chosen to believe a lie, and I let them live with that choice. Until one early spring afternoon, when everything I thought had been buried began to crack open like a fault line I couldn't hide. I had no idea that Ethan, the one who fabricated the entire story that destroyed my life, was lying in the ICU of a hospital in Illinois. Severe pneumonia, high fever, and delirium. But the one thing I never expected was that it would be his delirium that exposed the truth. According to a nurse's account later, during his nighttime panicked episodes, Ethan kept repeating the same sentence. "I made it all up. She didn't do anything." At first, no one paid attention. They thought it was just drug-induced hallucinations. But when Thomas, his mother, and his 2 sisters started taking turns staying by his bedside, things began to surface. "I faked the test. I just wanted revenge because she wouldn't help me get close to her sister." The words were murky, but repeated so many times it was chilling. Thomas's mother, Nancy, was the first to suspect something. She couldn't ignore the unease that crept in while watching her son drift between life and death, confessing over and over. Thomas reacted differently. When the phrase "I faked the DNA results" came out for the 4th time, he snapped. 2 years of buried rage exploded. Thomas lunged, grabbed his brother by the collar, and growled. "What did you just say? Say it again." Medical staff rushed in to break it up. The heart monitor screamed. A nurse was shoved to the floor. Security was called. Thomas was banned from the ICU for 48 hours. Ethan kept rambling in delirium, but what needed to be said had already been said. When his confession reached the rest of the family, their world collapsed instantly. Nancy screamed in the hospital restroom. Her sobs echoed through the hallway. She locked herself in for an hour and had to be sedated when she finally came out hysterical. Audrey collapsed on the spot. She clutched my wedding photo with Thomas, stared at it for a long time, then slammed it down so hard the glass shattered, cutting her hand. But she didn't even flinch. Sophia was quieter, but her face went pale. She went home, locked her door, and didn't show up to work for 12 days. The truth, no matter how late, was still the truth. And it flooded that family like a tidal wave. washing away everything they once believed. Thomas began searching for me the moment the hospital ban lifted. He contacted my old friends, former co-workers in Milwaukee, even hired a private investigator. But he didn't know I had changed my name, all my documents, and lived as if Olivia Gallagher had never existed. The investigator found nothing. The only piece of information came from a mutual friend. Someone told him I was doing well and didn't want to be found. The only thing Tomas had left was a single photo of Eli, accidentally posted on someone's social media during a birthday party at a daycare. That little boy had soft curly hair and hazel eyes. Just like him. He didn't need confirmation. Thomas knew. That was his son. But to me, Eli wasn't a tie to the past. He was living proof of everything I had survived. And I had no intention of letting the past intrude into our lives again. Thomas searched in vain. Since the day Ethan confessed, he became a different person. Silent, sleepless, often sitting for hours with our faded wedding photo. He hired 2 more private investigators, changed 4 phone numbers, created dozens of fake social media accounts, just to catch any trace of me or the child. But nothing. I had disappeared too thoroughly. No bank account under my old name, no rental registration, no health insurance documents showing I ever existed as Olivia Gallagher. Until one day Marissa, my college best friend who lives in Portland, called me while I was setting the table for Eli. "Liv, I'm sorry," she whispered, hesitating. "Thomas just called. I don't know how he got my number, but he knows you're alive and that you have a child." I clenched my hand. The spoon in my other hand tapped the pot. Eli looked up, his hazel eyes filled with the kind of curiosity only children have. "What did you tell him?" "I didn't reveal anything, but Liv," he cried. "I've never heard Thomas sound like that, like he had nothing left." I didn't say a word. That night, I didn't sleep. 3 days later, just after I picked up Eli from school and was watering the lavender pots on the balcony, there was a knock at the door. I knew instantly. I didn't need the peephole. I knew who was standing outside. And I was right. Thomas stood there, visibly thinner, his jacket wrinkled, eyes sunken like he had walked all the way from Wisconsin to Oregon. That look? It wasn't the look of the man who had once spat in my face 2 years ago. I didn't say a word, just cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock fastened. He looked at me, then his eyes drifted past me, toward Eli, who was sitting on the rug taking off his shoes. He looked, and in that moment I saw it, Thomas's entire world crumbling. "That's him, isn't it?" he whispered, voice hoarse. "That's our son." I didn't respond. I quietly closed the door. The sound echoed down the empty hallway like a cold verdict. He came back the next day, and the day after that. On the 4th visit, I found a letter placed neatly at my doorstep. The handwriting, slightly slanted, was unmistakable. It was the same one that used to leave love notes in my lunchbox. I didn't open it. I left it by the cactus pot on the shelf and let it dry out under the sun. Then came flowers, toys, printed photos from our wedding. Everything I had forgotten or tried to forget. Eli asked, "Why does that man keep standing outside our door, Mom?" I replied, "He's confused, sweetie, he's at the wrong house." But children always see deeper than what we say. He didn't ask again. He just quietly started drawing pictures of a brown-haired man in a blue shirt, standing next to the 2 of us. One night, while I was clearing the dinner table, I heard sniffles from the hallway. Not knocking this time. Someone was sitting against the wall, crying. I stood behind the door, back pressed to the wood, silent as stone. "I believed you, but it's too late," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't protect you. I let them drag you out of the home I should have fought to keep for you." I didn't open the door, but I cried. After several days of reflection, I left a small folded note in the mailbox out front, sealed tight. Thomas would find it. Inside, I wrote, "You will be allowed to see Eli. Once a year, on his birthday. 2 hours. Supervised. No talk of the past, no apologies. Break this, and the opportunity is gone forever." 3 days later, a new note appeared in the mailbox. "I agree, thank you, for everything. I thought that would be the end of it after Thomas received my letter. 2 weeks later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, the doorbell rang while I was folding laundry. Through the peephole, I saw Nancy, my former mother-in-law, standing with a large white bundle in her arms. Beside her were Audrey and Sophia, each carrying something. They stood close together, their faces no longer smug, but weary and solemn, like people who had just left a funeral. I remained behind the door unmoved. They didn't knock again, they just stood there in silence, and then I heard Nancy's voice, soft, fragile, like someone who had lost the most important thing in her life. "Olivia, if you're in there, please just hear me out. We were wrong, so wrong we can't fix it." I didn't move. Audrey spoke next. "We brought letters. Toys for Eli. We don't expect forgiveness. We just want you to know we finally understand what we destroyed." Blair. I felt the cold seep into my body. These were the same people who once dragged me into the street and slapped me across the face. Now they were standing under the roof I rebuilt with 2 years of effort, apologizing. But I stayed behind the curtain, unmoved. I simply slipped a piece of paper through the gap and nudged it outward. They picked it up and read the words I'd written. "You humiliated me in public, now learn to regret it in silence." No other words were needed. I heard Sophia choke up, then the soft thud of a gift bag hitting the porch. The three of them turned and left. No one said another word. They returned 3 more times over the next 3 weeks, each time with letters, gifts, flowers, teddy bears, and apologies, handwritten, printed, or recorded. I never opened the door. I gave everything to Marissa to handle. One day she brought back a long letter from Nancy, written in trembling handwriting on old letterhead from a mental wellness center in Iowa. "I've spent 6 weeks in therapy just to learn how to admit I was wrong," Nancy wrote. "Not because I want forgiveness, but because I can't live with myself unless I face what I did." I read it, folded it up, and gave no reply. A week later I met with a lawyer. Martha Lowell, 56, was a seasoned attorney specializing in custody rights for mothers affected by emotional abuse. She listened silently as I told her everything. When I got to the part where Thomas spat in my face in front of his entire family, she simply nodded and scribbled a note. "We have enough to build a legal firewall," she said. I asked, "Can I make it so he has no legal claim over Eli? Is that possible?" Ms. Lowell studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Highly likely. His name was never on the birth certificate. The child was born in a context of maternal psychological abuse and severe invasion of privacy by the father's family. We'll build a full case file." I nodded. My heart didn't tremble anymore. I wasn't doing this out of vengeance. I was doing it for Eli, to ensure he never had to live in fear of someone showing up to rip him away from the life I'd built for us. 7 weeks later, the court approved the petition to restrict legal contact rights. A copy was sent to Thomas's address via his attorney. From that day on, any request to see Eli had to go through an independent monitoring service and only took place at a designated location. Thomas didn't object. He just sent one email, the first and last, with the subject line, "I understand." And for the first time in 2.5 years, I slept through the night without dreaming of someone standing outside my door. Thomas showed up on Eli's birthday every year, at exactly 2 o'clock, never early or late, always carrying a carefully wrapped gift and the same sad eyes. Eli called him Mr. Thomas, not Dad, not Father, just the man who came once a year, played with the wooden train, listened to stories about dinosaurs and locomotives, then quietly left when the clock hit 2 hours. Thomas never protested. He never brought up the past, never begged for more. Just once, when Eli turned 4, he quietly asked, "Does he ever ask about me?" I answered truthfully, "No, he has a full life." Thomas nodded, smiled with something between pain and acceptance. Marissa, my closest friend, and I started a small support group called Quiet Roots. We began with private gatherings in her living room where women who had been falsely accused, manipulated, or had their reputations ruined could come and simply be heard. No judgment, no proof required, just listening and empathy. We shared knowledge on building legal barriers, protecting personal information, and moving forward after being publicly defamed. The group grew steadily. We moved to meeting rooms at the local library and eventually to a community center on the east side of town. A wife falsely accused of cheating so her husband could walk away clean. A teacher slandered by parents to get her removed from a class. A woman whose mother-in-law ruined her name in the eyes of the entire family. They found us, and found quiet space to heal. Thomas's family started to change, or at least tried. Audrey quit her PR job and joined a nonprofit supporting victims of emotional abuse. Sophia enrolled in school again to study social work. Nancy moved near a small monastery. No more social media, no more letters. Just a bouquet of lavender left on Eli's first day of school each year. They didn't keep in touch with him. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need their presence to feel peace. I forgave myself first. The rest didn't matter anymore. Ethan, the one who created the storm, now lived quietly in a small southern Colorado town. I learned that through a lawyer friend of Marissa's who once handled land records in that area. He rented a cheap room, delivered packages by the hour, and no one there knew who he really was. There was no family backing him, no one left who believed in his words. I never wrote a second letter to Ethan. The first, just one line, was enough. You destroyed a woman and created a mother. My child will never know your name. I didn't need to see Ethan fall apart. I didn't need his ruin. I just needed him to understand that choices have consequences. And the price of destroying someone's dignity isn't jail. It's being forgotten by the world you once deceived. One night, after Eli fell asleep following his 5th birthday party, I sat alone on the balcony, watching faint lights flicker in the distance. On the table was Eli's drawing. 3 people standing together. Him, me, and Miss Marissa. No Thomas. No past. Just the present and a future I was building for him piece by piece. My story isn't just about betrayal or a child born in a storm. It's about a woman learning to rise from wreckage, rebuilding life with trust in herself. I didn't need forgiveness from those who tore me down. I needed freedom, peace, and a future where my child grows up free from the pain I once endured. Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. And living joyfully. Whew, that's the most beautiful response. What do you think about Olivia's journey? Would you forgive if you were in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more moving and powerful stories about life, family, and the choices that shape us.